What's one moment in your life that changed everything in your family?
They said if I wanted college so bad, I should work for it. That was the phrase, dropped at the dinner table like a soggy napkin no one wanted to claim. It wasn't a conversation. It wasn't even a debate. It was a statement, a ruling passed down with the kind of offhand certainty that lets you know they'd rehearsed it already, behind closed doors. While I was busy folding laundry or wiping down the kitchen counters or picking my sister up from her boyfriend's house because she lost her phone again. It was my senior year of high school, and while most kids were arguing over prom dresses and Instagram captions, I was lying awake at night Googling the difference between subsidized and unsubsidized loans, trying to figure out if the FAFSA gods would show mercy to a girl with a part-time cashier job and a permanent place at the bottom of the family totem pole. My sister Emily, on the other hand, had just gotten her own car. Not a new one, but new enough that it had Bluetooth and didn't smell like gym socks. She didn't ask for it. That was the part that stung the most. She never asked. It just showed up in the driveway one morning, like the universe had left her a gift and marked it from mom and dad. No strings, no expectations, no lectures about responsibility or value. They even paid for her insurance, just until she gets on her feet, my dad said, although Emily hadn't worked a single job in her life unless you counted pet sitting for the neighbor's cat, which she forgot to feed for 2 days. Meanwhile, I was scraping together paychecks from weekend shifts at the local grocery store, praying I wouldn't get stuck on Register 5 because the scanner was busted and the manager, Greg, smelled like beef jerky and disappointment. But I didn't argue. I didn't scream or cry or throw plates. That would have given them something to point at, another reason I was difficult, emotional, too intense. No, I kept my voice level, my eyes dry, and my head down. That night, after they told me college would be my problem to solve, I waited until they went to bed, then slid my laptop under my blanket and started applying for scholarships. Every single one I could find. Essay contests, community service grants, even some weird ones sponsored by a peanut butter brand. I wrote about leadership, poverty, ambition, and dreams, all while the rest of the house snored comfortably, with no idea what it felt like to be told that wanting more made you entitled. High school became a countdown clock. Every hallway, every test, every cafeteria lunch with tasteless chicken nuggets and sticky trays was one step closer to my escape. I didn't go to prom. I didn't buy a yearbook. I didn't pose for senior photos with a fake smile and a borrowed cap. I spent that money on a used laptop and noise-canceling headphones so I could study without hearing Emily blast music while she filmed dance videos in the living room. No one noticed. Or if they did, no one said anything. When college acceptance letters started rolling in, I opened them alone. I read them in the bathroom with the door locked or in the backseat of my car on lunch breaks. I got into 5 schools. 5. All on my own. I didn't tell my parents. Not right away. I waited. I waited until one night, over spaghetti and garlic bread, my dad asked if I was still thinking about that college thing, like it was some teenage phase I was supposed to have outgrown by now. That's when I slid the envelope across the table, the one with the university seal embossed in gold and the words "full tuition scholarship" printed clearly on top. My mom blinked. My dad raised his eyebrows. Emily looked at me like I'd just pulled a rabbit out of my mouth. "Well, that's good," my dad finally said, and then he turned back to his plate. Just like that. No celebration, no hug, no "we're proud of you." Just a nod, like I'd mentioned buying new shoes or rearranging my closet. Later that night, I heard them talking in their bedroom, voices muffled but sharp. Something about how she'll figure it out and it'll be good for her to struggle a little. I stopped listening after that. Here's the thing people don't talk about. When you grow up being the strong one, the independent one, the one who doesn't need as much, you become invisible. Your needs are framed as complaints. Your silence becomes agreement. And every time you speak up, they act like you're starting a war. So I stopped speaking. I started planning. I found a dorm with the cheapest meal plan. I mapped out work-study jobs. I calculated rent down to the dollar. I even created a spreadsheet for textbook costs and part-time hours. I knew I'd be tired. I knew I'd be broke. but at least I'd be out. The night before I left for college, they took Emily out for dinner because she was having a rough week. I packed my own bags, carried them down myself. My dad handed me $100 bill and said, "Don't blow it all on lattes." My mom gave me a hug that barely lasted 2 seconds. Emily waved from the couch without looking up from her phone. I drove myself to campus in a borrowed car with no AC and 3/4 of a tank. No fanfare. No send-off. Just me, the road, and a quiet resolve that was colder and sharper than anything they'd ever given me. And that's when I knew I wouldn't tell them anything they didn't earn the right to know. Not my midterms. Not my heartbreaks. Not my successes. And definitely not the date of my graduation. But let me ask you something and be honest. If your family made you feel like a ghost in your own life, would you still invite them to your biggest moment? Or would you finally let them miss something they didn't help build? Because I already knew my answer. And my revenge had just begun. The first night in my dorm was quieter than I expected, not peaceful, just empty, like walking into a motel room where someone had lived for too long and then left in a hurry, taking everything that mattered and leaving behind only the smell of dust and detergent. The walls were pale and chipped near the corners, the twin-sized bed creaked even when I sat down gently, and the shared bathrooms smelled faintly of bleach and regret, but for the first time in my life, the space belonged to me. Not in a warm, cozy way, not in a home kind of way, but in the sense that no one could barge in, roll their eyes, or tell me to keep it down because someone more important needed quiet. This was my noise now. My mess. My start. Back home, Emily had just moved into her new apartment, a 2-bedroom in a modern building with granite countertops and a balcony she used mostly for selfies. My parents had helped with the deposit, the furniture, and a small monthly allowance, as my mom called it, which Emily interpreted as a green light to skip looking for work and spend afternoons sipping overpriced coffee while planning the next weekend trip with her friends. She was still figuring it out, they said, as if self-discovery were a luxury only certain daughters deserved. Meanwhile, I was unpacking thrift store towels and setting alarms for 4 in the morning because my new job was janitorial, cleaning one of the campus science buildings before the sun came up, before classes started, before anyone would notice the girl in gloves scrubbing sinks and picking gum out of the lecture hall carpet. The pay was bad, the hours were worse, and some days I wondered if the fatigue in my bones would ever let me feel awake again, but it was mine, and it was honest, and it got me through that first semester when the scholarships didn't cover toothpaste, and ramen was the only meal that didn't make my bank account cry. My roommate, Kayla, was a loud sleeper with a heavy perfume addiction and an on-again off-again boyfriend who thought I was invisible, which worked out fine because I had no energy for small talk or complaints. She came from a well-off family in Connecticut, with siblings who visited monthly and sent care packages from home filled with things like imported chocolates and folded laundry. Sometimes I'd come back from class to find their laughter echoing in the hallway, their easy love spreading across the room like a blanket I wasn't invited to share. I didn't resent her for it, not really, but it made the cracks in my own story feel wider, deeper, like there was something permanently broken in the way I was raised to believe silence meant strength. I started spending more time in the library, not just for studying, but for the quiet, the warmth, and the feeling that someone somewhere had built a space for thinking, for becoming. For people like me who didn't have anyone waiting at home to ask how the day went. It was there I met Danny, a senior working the night shift at the circulation desk with a calm voice and the kind of smile that didn't ask questions it didn't want real answers to. We didn't fall into each other right away. We hovered, circling slowly, two tired souls orbiting around late nights and shared vending machine snacks. He never asked why I looked like I hadn't slept in days, and I never told him that my family hadn't called in over a month, not even once. And that silence? That cold, deliberate absence? It stopped hurting after a while. Or maybe it just hardened into something else. Something sharper. I remember calling home once, not out of need, but out of curiosity, just to see if the line still worked. My mom answered, distracted, clearly mid-conversation with someone else. She said she was so proud, but didn't ask what my classes were or how I was doing or if I needed anything. Instead, she asked if I could help Emily with a college essay she'd been putting off, something about personal growth or leadership. Emily, who wasn't even planning to apply until spring. Emily, who had missed 2 classes at the local community college and was thinking of dropping one because the professor just gave bad vibes. I agreed to help, not because I wanted to, but because saying no would lead to more questions, more guilt, more long silences followed by cold calls that ended with, "Well, you've always been the responsible one." I wrote the essay. I made it sound like it came from a girl who learned life's lessons the hard way, who overcame obstacles, who grew up being the underdog. And when Emily submitted it and got praised by her advisor for her raw honesty, I nearly laughed. Not because it was funny, but because it was mine. There's a kind of quiet vengeance in giving people exactly what they asked for and letting them believe it came from somewhere else. No screaming. No accusations. Just truth, cleverly dressed in someone else's clothes. I didn't tell them about the night I fell asleep on the library floor because I was too tired to walk back to the dorm. I didn't tell them about the panic attack I had before my first chem midterm or the time I almost fainted in the cafeteria because I hadn't eaten in 20 hours. I didn't tell them anything, really. I saved my words for lectures, my thoughts for essays, and my feelings for late-night walks where no one could see how much I still wanted to be chosen, just once, without asking for it. By mid-semester, I had become a ghost with perfect attendance. I sat in the front of every class, turned in every assignment early, and smiled politely when professors complimented my work ethic. No one saw the cost. No one asked. And maybe that's when the idea began to bloom, small and bitter like a dandelion growing through concrete. That when the time came, when the moment finally arrived where every sacrifice, every humiliation, every lonely night finally paid off, I wouldn't give them the satisfaction of being there. I wouldn't offer them the applause. I wouldn't let them stand in the glow of a future they never helped illuminate. Because this wasn't just about a diploma. It was about the years they pretended I didn't need them. It was about the difference between survival and being seen. And more than anything, it was about learning that some people don't deserve front-row seats to your triumph when they skipped every rehearsal. Thanksgiving came early that year, not because of the calendar, but because my professors, all seemingly in sync with the rising tide of student burnout, decided to shift deadlines and cancel lectures, which left me with 5 full days of freedom that I hadn't asked for and didn't know what to do with. For a few minutes, I considered staying on campus. The dorms would be half empty, the library practically deserted, and the idea of walking the quiet hallways in sweatpants with no pressure or performance had its own quiet appeal. But then, out of some strange sense of obligation, or maybe guilt masked as curiosity, I packed a duffel bag and took the bus home. It wasn't because I missed them, or because I thought something had changed, no, it was more like returning to a house you once lived in just to see if the walls still smelled like you, to test if the ghosts would recognize you. Or if you'd become just another visitor passing through a place that stopped being yours a long time ago. When I walked through the door, the first thing I noticed was the absence of my room. Not that the room had disappeared, the walls were still there, the door still had my crooked name tag from middle school, but the bed had been replaced with plastic storage bins, the desk buried under gift wrap, extra pillows, and a stack of unopened Amazon boxes with Emily's name scrawled across each one. My posters, books, and the photo strip from freshman orientation were nowhere to be seen. It looked like a storage unit with better lighting. My mom, when I asked about it, laughed as if the transformation were a compliment. "We just needed space," she said, not even pretending to feel awkward. Emily needed a place to keep her extra stuff since she's outgrowing her apartment already. She's doing so well out there, you know? And that was it, not a mention of whether they thought I'd come back. Not even a suggestion that I might need a place to sleep. I carried my bag back downstairs and ended up crashing on the old pull-out couch, the one with the broken spring that jutted up into your spine like a question mark. Dinner that night was exactly what you'd expect. Mashed potatoes out of a box, cranberry sauce shaped like the can it came from, and conversations that looped endlessly around Emily's plans for the winter, her new Pilates class, the boy she was sort of dating, but not really because he had commitment issues. My father chimed in occasionally, laughing at all the right spots, while my mother nodded along as if each trivial detail were a revelation. No one asked about my classes. No one asked how I was doing. I might as well have been the neighbor's kid who dropped by because her own family forgot she existed. I tried once to bring up a recent research paper I'd been proud of, something that had earned me a quiet, well done, from a professor who rarely gave compliments, but before I could finish the second sentence, Emily interrupted to ask if anyone had tried the pumpkin pie she brought from that place downtown. Everyone shifted immediately. I stopped talking. I didn't bring it up. Again. Later that evening, after they all went to bed, Emily in her old room, perfectly untouched, and my parents upstairs in the warmth of their matching bathrobes, I wandered into the hallway and opened the linen closet where my mom used to keep old family photos. I don't know what I was looking for exactly. Maybe some proof that I hadn't made it all up, that there was a time when I was wanted, when I mattered, when they saw me. I found one album, thick and dusty, shoved between a stack of towels and a pile of tangled Christmas lights. Inside were page after page of Emily's childhood, Emily at the zoo, Emily in ballet class, Emily asleep on the couch with a puppy that we apparently had for all of 2 weeks. There were notes, too, little captions written in my mother's careful cursive. Emily's first piano recital, she was so brave, or she lost her first tooth here, cried, but smiled anyway. My name appeared twice. Once in the corner of a group shot from a beach trip, with an arrow pointing vaguely at the edge. And once in a blurry birthday picture, no caption, no year. I closed the album, not gently, not violently, just with the kind of pressure that said I'd seen enough. Back on the couch, I pulled out a small notebook I kept with me, my own little archive, nothing fancy, just scraps of memory and plans, dates and numbers, fragments of conversations I wanted to remember and others I wished I could forget. On the last page, I wrote, "Make it hurt without saying a word." It wasn't a plan yet, not fully, but it was the seed. I'd been living too long on scraps of praise and stolen recognition, and I realized then that whatever final moment I had, whatever triumph I earned, I wouldn't share it with people who couldn't even offer me a blanket when I came home. The next morning, Emily was gone before I woke up, something about brunch plans and a yoga class she couldn't cancel. My parents made coffee but forgot to make any for me. I took a shower in silence, packed my bag, and left without saying goodbye. The bus back to campus was half empty, and the ride gave me enough time to start thinking seriously about something Danny had mentioned in passing the week before early graduation. I hadn't considered it before, hadn't believed it was something people like me could even do, but suddenly it felt like the most logical move I could make. Not just for the efficiency, the savings, or the freedom, but because it meant I could have that moment, that clean break, without the messy expectations of a family that would pretend to care only when it suited their narrative. Back on campus, I walked past the administration building and stared at the glass doors for a long time before going inside. The registrar's office was quiet. I asked the woman behind the desk if she could walk me through what I'd need to do to graduate early. She didn't even blink. Just pulled out a packet, highlighted a few key lines, and said, "It's not easy, but it's doable. Especially if you're driven." Driven. That was a nice word for what I was. Obsessive, maybe. Relentless. But also ready, not just to be done, but to end it my way, with no one clapping for a performance they never bothered to rehearse with me. As I walked out into the cold, I didn't feel lighter, but I did feel sharper, more deliberate. This wasn't about escaping anymore. This was about arrival. About standing in a room full of names being called and knowing that when mine echoed through the speakers, it would mean something only to me, and that would be enough. I wouldn't need applause. I wouldn't need flowers or tears or photos. I would need only the quiet satisfaction of knowing that they missed it, that they missed me, and that they would never know just how important the moment was, because they never bothered to ask. By the time I stood in line with my cap in one hand and the weight of 4 years balanced quietly on the bones of my shoulders, the air in the auditorium smelled of polished wood, artificial flowers, and someone else's triumph. There was a peculiar sort of silence humming underneath all the chatter, as if the room itself understood what was about to happen mattered deeply to some and very little to others. I stood alone, wearing the gown I had ordered myself, pressed and hung carefully in the back of my closet for the past 2 months, because I had decided early on that this would not be an occasion for them, not for my parents, not for Emily, and not for anyone who had spent the last 4 years ignoring every quiet scream for acknowledgement I had never let slip out loud. The decision not to tell them the date, the time, or even that the ceremony existed at all wasn't one I made in anger or in a fit of bitterness. It was a slow, deliberate calculation, not a moment of rage, but a collection of absences stacked high until it became its own kind of justice. I had finished my requirements the semester before, tucked each final paper into neat PDFs, turned in every assignment, survived every lab, and paid my last tuition balance with 3 months of back-to-back graveyard shifts at the hospital records office downtown. There was no banner, no confetti, no "we're so proud" phone call echoing through the line like some of the others standing near me had received. Instead, there was the quiet comfort of my own certainty, the kind that builds over time when you have no one left to impress and nothing left to prove, but still push forward simply because you can't stomach the thought of not finishing something you bled for. A few days before the ceremony, the school sent out reminder emails, parking maps, and details about seating arrangements, encouraging graduates to share the logistics with their families. I read every line twice, and then dragged the email into my digital trash without hesitation. I watched the blinking cursor pause before the system asked, "Are you sure you want to delete this?" And I smiled, not a bitter smile, but a clean, satisfied one. Yes, I was sure. I had never been more sure of anything in my life. Danny, who had since graduated and moved 2 hours north for a job, texted me that morning to say he hoped I'd walk tall. He knew what the day meant, not because I'd told him all the messy details, but because he'd been around long enough to see the spaces where my story had gone silent and knew that silence didn't come from nowhere. He offered to come, but I told him not to. This was mine. All mine. No witnesses. No performance. The ceremony itself moved slowly, a blur of names and awkward clapping, tassels being adjusted, cords catching on zippers, families shouting from the back when their child's name was called, and the flash of cameras trying to capture something permanent in a sea of fleeting moments. I kept my eyes forward, hands steady, walking step by step with a strange kind of calm, not nerves, not pride, but something more grounded, like walking into a room you built with your own hands and finally locking the door behind you. When my name was called, I heard it echo, slightly mispronounced, but I smiled anyway because even a crooked version of it meant that I had arrived. I shook hands with the dean, posed for the photo I would never buy, and returned to my seat without looking into the crowd. I already knew there was no one looking for me. That was the point. After the ceremony, students poured into the lobby and courtyard, arms tangled with family members, bouquets pressed into their hands, parents crying, siblings rolling their eyes, grandparents holding up cell phones with shaky fingers. I slipped past all of it, like a ghost walking between worlds, unnoticed, untouched, unbothered. I sat for a few minutes on a bench near the back of the campus chapel, away from the crowd, took a deep breath, and let the moment settle over me like warm rain. It wasn't joy exactly. It was something quieter, but deeper, a release, maybe. A closing of something I had carried for so long it had started to feel like part of my spine. I took a photo, just one, of my cap and diploma sitting on my lap. No face, no smile, just the proof that I had done what they said I should do if I wanted it badly enough. I attached it to a blank text and sent it to my mother with the words, "Graduated today. Hope Emily's doing well." I didn't wait for a reply. I didn't expect one. But my hands were steady, and that was enough. That evening, as the sun dropped behind the edge of the library, I walked the long way back to my apartment, cutting through the quad where I had once cried on a bench after failing a calculus quiz and nearly convinced myself to quit. I passed the admin building where I had begged for extra aid during my second year when an unexpected medical bill nearly derailed everything. I walked by the food hall that had served me rice and vegetables more times than I could count because it was the only option that let me stretch a meal plan into a lifeline. When I got home, there was a voicemail waiting, my mom's voice, frantic and breathy, saying they had just gotten in the car and were on the way, that they hit traffic, that they couldn't find the right date in any of the emails and assumed it was next weekend. There was even a bit of trembling in her voice, like she wanted to sound hurt, betrayed, confused. I didn't listen to the whole message. I deleted it halfway through, not out of cruelty, but because I didn't owe her that moment. Not after everything. That night, I made myself a dinner of eggs, toast, and cheap wine from the bottle I had been saving for the right moment. Not to celebrate with anyone, not to toast a crowd or share a memory, but to mark a turning point. I sat on the floor, diploma propped against the wall, and thought about the countless hours I had spent waiting for them to notice, to care, to ask, to show up. And I realized I wasn't angry anymore. I was just done. And being done, really done, is its own kind of freedom. They had missed it. Missed all of it. Not because they couldn't make it, not because they didn't get the date, but because they had never asked in the first place. They had trained me to be silent, and I had honored that silence until it suited me. Until it could finally speak for me. And in that quiet, in that pause between the end and whatever comes next, I felt something close to peace. Or maybe it was just the weight of everything lifting slowly, surely, because I had finally chosen to stop waiting for people who never once chose me. There is a strange sort of clarity that arrives not in the moment of triumph, not even in the afterglow of it, but in the slow, unremarkable days that follow, the ones where no one claps, no one calls, and the world continues spinning exactly as it did before you became the version of yourself you fought so long to build. It had been 4 days since graduation, 4 long, quiet days of unpacking my cap and gown, folding it not with pride but with precision, as if wrapping away evidence of something intimate, something earned without witnesses, something I wasn't quite ready to celebrate but couldn't bear to forget. My apartment, still sparse with only a second-hand couch, a thrift store bookshelf, and a twin bed that groaned every time I turned over, felt at once like a sanctuary and a stage, not one for applause, but for reflection. For watching the life I had chosen begin without the weight of performance. I took the diploma out of the shipping envelope that morning, smoothing the edges with my palm, running my fingers over the gold lettering as if to confirm, once again, that it was real. Not because I doubted I had earned it, but because part of me still struggled to believe that anything truly mine could exist without someone trying to diminish it, claim it, or simply ignore it. It was heavy, heavier than I expected, and for a while I didn't know where to put it. It felt wrong to leave it in a drawer, wrong to hang it in the hallway like a trophy, and too personal to prop up on my desk next to the stack of bills and empty coffee mugs. So I walked to a small framing shop 3 blocks away, the kind of place with faded posters in the window and a bell that jingled when you opened the door. The woman behind the counter was older, with sharp eyes and kind hands, and when she saw what I carried, she didn't ask who it belonged to or what it meant. She just nodded and said, "Let's find the right frame." While she wrapped it carefully in tissue paper, I wandered through the aisles, past dusty frames filled with strangers' families, generic sunsets, and faded wedding invitations. And then I saw it, an old frame tucked near the bottom shelf, the wood worn but elegant, the kind of piece that didn't beg for attention but knew it deserved to be seen. I bought it without asking the price, handed her the diploma, and told her I'd come back in a week. That evening, I opened a box I hadn't touched in over a year, the one I'd taken from the hallway closet during that Thanksgiving visit, the one that held the old photo albums and scraps of memory my mother had archived so carefully, but only when they belonged to Emily. I pulled out the smallest photo, the one I had kept for reasons I still couldn't fully explain, a black and white image of me as a newborn, wrapped tightly in a hospital blanket, eyes barely open, no family members in the shot. Just a nurse holding me like a duty fulfilled. I stared at it for a long time, not because it held sentimental value, but because it felt honest. That moment, that snapshot, contained no illusions, just me, alone, before anyone had the chance to make me feel like I had to earn their love. I pinned the photo next to my desk, right above the spot where the diploma would soon hang, not as a symbol of trauma or sadness, but as a kind of silent declaration. I was mine long before I ever belonged to anyone else, and I would be mine long after, too. A few days later, A package arrived unannounced, unaddressed in handwriting I didn't recognize until I saw the return label. Mitchell, RNC. Inside was a card with gold trim, the kind that came in boxes of 10 from discount department stores. And a note written in my mother's familiar script. We didn't mean to miss it. We thought it was next weekend. Things got confusing. We hope you're not angry. We love you. We're proud of you. Come visit soon. Below that, a $200 check folded neatly inside, as if money might patch over absence, as if a monetary gesture might somehow rebuild 4 years of silence, forgetfulness, and willful blindness. I didn't cash the check. I didn't reply to the note. I folded it back into the envelope and placed it in the drawer next to my lease, my voter registration card, and the rejection letters I had saved over the years, not out of bitterness, but as reminders of the obstacles I'd had to carve through alone. Because despite the soft language of that letter, I knew they weren't proud of me in the way I had needed. They were proud in the safe, sanitized way that made them feel good, in the version of pride you dust off when the work is already done, when there's no more investment required, no real presence asked for. A few nights after, Emily called, something she hadn't done in months. Her voice, light and casual, floated through the receiver like nothing had happened. She asked how things were, said she saw a post from someone on campus mentioning graduation, and figured I'd finished by now. When I told her I had, that it was over, that I'd walked and it had been fine, there was a pause, not long, but just enough to feel like it cracked through something. Kinda harsh you didn't invite us, she said, her voice more confused than hurt. I mean, even if Mom and Dad were busy, I would have come. You know I would have. I let the silence hang between us. I didn't remind her that she hadn't returned my texts for over a year, or that the last time we were in the same room, she hadn't looked at me longer than 10 seconds. I didn't say any of that. Instead, I said the truest thing I could. You don't think? That's the difference. She laughed, a little nervously, then changed the subject. We spoke for 6 more minutes about the weather, the rising rent in her neighborhood, a new brunch spot she wanted to try. When the call ended, I didn't feel angry. I felt confirmed. That night, I hung the diploma in its frame and stood back to look at it, letting the glow of the overhead light trace its edges like some quiet kind of blessing. It didn't sparkle. It didn't shimmer. But it stood. Steady. Whole. Mine. And beneath it, taped to the wall with no fanfare, no caption, and no apology, sat the photo of that little girl, not smiling, not crying, just existing in the arms of a stranger, already learning that no one would carry her forever. Maybe that's the truest ending I could ever write, not a dramatic rupture or a furious goodbye, but a gentle withdrawal, a quiet refusal to be unseen any longer. They may never understand the weight of what they missed. They may never even try. But I will never again shrink myself to fit into the empty space they offered me. And if that makes me cold, hard, distant, so be it. Better to be distant than diminished. Better to be invisible by choice than ignored by accident. I don't know if they'll ever call again. I don't know if I'll answer. What I do know is this. When I finally walked across that stage, I carried only one thing in my pocket, not their approval, not their pride, but the truth. And sometimes, that's the only thing that belongs in the frame.